Well, welcome back to Bridge Community Church. Like I alluded to, I was here last week, and if you felt like it was something worth your time, then that's good news because I'm back. And if you thought, oh man, what a waste of my time, I'm really sorry you showed up thinking like, oh, I hope somebody else will show. Sorry, there's the exits if you got to go. Well, last week we were in Mark chapter 4. And we were reading this parable of the sower. And let me give you the Spark Note version. If you haven't been to high school for a while, let me tell you what Spark Notes are. Spark Notes are these things. It's basically like a 20-page review of a book that you're supposed to read and you don't, but you still want to write a paper and pretend like you did. You buy the Spark Notes, you can read it in like 30 minutes. So this is the cheater's guide literally to last week's sermon. Last week's sermon was in Mark chapter 4. We read this parable of the sower. And in the parable of the sower, it basically goes like this. The farmer goes out and just starts throwing seed to the wind. Wherever seed lands is up to wherever the wind takes it, but seed lands. And Jesus says the kingdom of God is like this. The kingdom is just free in the wind. It will land where it will. And we actually don't know where the good soil is until somebody hears the word and proves that they are good soil based on the condition of their heart to receive it. And in that case, Jesus says the kingdom of God is like that. It starts very small, but the yield is 30, 60, 100 times so massive that although it starts small, nobody can deny how big it will become if you let it grow. And so last week, Mark was trying to help us answer this question. What is the kingdom of God, and what is it like? This week, we are going to continue just a couple stories later in Mark, and I'm convinced that Mark wants us to ask a bigger question. And we're going to see the same question on the lips of the disciples, and it's this. Why does Jesus have the authority to bring the kingdom? Who is he exactly? Why on earth is he this human man who's walking around and yelling at fishermen to leave their nets and come follow him? What is it about him? And we're kind of being asked to come along for the ride of this adventure and get swept up in the story and ask ourselves, could this guy truly be the Son of God right in front of us? And so my challenge before we jump in is this, that you would just take a deep breath and maybe get swept up into the story in a brand new way. Maybe you've heard this story 100 times. Maybe I told you, Ben and I had this wonderful divine connection where God did this, and you're like, oh, great, I already know that one. If that's you, take a deep breath. Let's see what God has for us. And I have a hunch that God's going to send us out of here encouraged and uplifted and feeling like we can go about another week under his power. Amen? So if you have a Bible, you should flip it open. If not, it'll be on the screen. We're going to be in Mark chapter 4, and we're going to start at verse 35. Verse 35 says this, That day when evening came, he, being Jesus, said to his disciples, Let us go over to the other side of the lake. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. Now I want to pause, and I want to point a couple things out. I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, if you read the Bible or you go to church and you hear enough sermons, we are trained in our culture to be looking for the nuggets that matter, right? If you get like a financial report, you want to skim through really quick and get the graphs or the things that really matter. And we're trained to do that, and unfortunately we take it with us to the Bible. And what I think happens is the collateral damage is a verse like this we brush over because we're looking for the action. And unfortunately, we miss something very significant going on right in front of us. So let me tell you what's going on here. Jesus has finished this teaching, including the parable that we learned last week. And he tells his disciples, let's get into the boat and let's go to the other side of the lake. Now, I am convinced this morning that those disciples would have been looking at each other with their jaws on the floor. Here's why. The other side of the lake is not a place that Jews go. The other side of the lake is a place that's called the Decapolis. It's a series of towns and cities all along the road, and they are pagan Gentile people. In fact, there is a lot of history in Jewish culture that says this. You start teaching your kids at a young age, you do not go there. You do not go there. In fact, I was reading this week and I read a commentary that said it is very likely that even the fishermen in Jesus' disciple group who fished that lake their whole lives, it is possible that they have never even been to the other side, that their dads who were fishermen had never been to the other side, grandparents never on the other side. And Jesus says two things that terrify the disciples, especially the fishermen. He says, let's go to the other side, and let's do it at night. Because that doesn't sound creepy at all, right? Here's what the disciples know, and here's what I know because I read all about it on Friday, nerding out in front of a computer. It turns out that this lake, the Sea of Galilee, at night is notorious for two different microclimates hitting each other and creating wild, crazy winds, like different direction winds. Fishermen were told very early in life when they became fishermen, once the sun starts coming down, you need to get back to shore as fast as possible because when the temperature drops, the lake becomes a madhouse. So this is literally what Jesus says. Let's paddle across a lake in the middle of the most temperamental time possible, and let's go to a side that you've been taught from a very early age is off limits, pagan, Gentile, and you should never go there. Sounds like a good start to a story I want to read. Verse 37. A furious squall came up. I don't know why we still translate this word squall. You guys know that's a storm? I didn't until I was like 21 years old. I was like learning the Bible, and I was like, yeah, a squall, of course. No clue. It's a storm. A furious storm came up. Predictable, actually. And the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Let's just piece this out on the very basics of this story. We have fishermen leading a boat, and even they are terrified by this storm. If there's anybody in the vicinity of the Sea of Galilee who should know how to navigate the waters, it's fishermen. And even they are scared of this storm, so much so, they think they're going to drown to death. Good start. It's the middle of the night now. It's dark. Extra creepy. And then we have Jesus, who, if we've been reading the Gospel of Mark, we know a few things about him, not a lot. He teaches well. He does some miracles. He's got some weird divine connection with God the Father that we're still maybe trying to piece together and figure out. And then we just got this dropped on us. Apparently, he sleeps in the middle of a storm so big that people are worried they're going to drown to death. This is odd. Would you agree? They come to him, and listen to what they say. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus, maybe some of you relate. My wife's not in here, so I'm just going to say it. I am a pretty kind, nice guy until I've been sleeping for a little while and somebody wakes me up before I'm ready. Then I turn into a monster. Anybody relate? Anyone want to just get it off your chest? Any monsters out there? Jesus, he gets up. I don't know what his body language is, but he doesn't respond to the disciples. He doesn't say, like, "You idiots, you're not going to drown." He gets waken up, and the first thing he does is just rebukes the wind and the waves by saying, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. This is a strange story so far. It's odd, to say the least. And it goes on. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." I think it's Matthew or Luke writes it a different way, and I love how they write it. What kind of man is this? It's like, is he a superhero? Is he a cyborg? Like, how does he do it? Right? So here's the question. Who is this? I want to point one thing out to you. The storm, which is coming over the edges of the boat. They're terrified they're going to drown. It's the middle of the night. They're en route to a place they're not supposed to go. They all feel like they're going to die. Jesus wakes up, and it doesn't say that he commanded and the heavy rain turned into sprinkles, or the wind died down to just like 5 kilometers an hour. It says calm. And then it tells us that despite its calmness, the disciples are still terrified. Why are they so terrified? It turns out that the Bible has a long history of this theme, and you should look it up. You shouldn't take these things at face value. You should always look these things up. It has this theme, and this is basically how Jews believe. They believe that the weather patterns are part of this realm, the spiritual realm where there is spiritual warfare going on. That weather patterns are often used as destructive evil forces like famines or floods or, hail on crops or freezing at the wrong time of year. They usually lament and they say like, it's the broken, evil world we live in and it's fighting back against us. And every now and then, God shows up and does something incredible to change the weather. Let me give you a couple examples. In the book of 1 Kings, Elijah is told to pray to withhold rain, and God withholds rain. And then when it comes time, God brings plenty of rain and the crops flourish. Another good example is that at the edge of the Red Sea, when everyone is convinced that the Egyptians are about to just slaughter them, God tells them, I have the control to split the sea if you just believe. And he has Moses raise his staff, and the sea separates because God, it says, puts his hand down and does it. And then when they cross through, what does it say? It says that God releases his hand and the waters smash the Egyptians. This is what's going on. These disciples grew up with this story. They know this story. They know that the forces of nature are not something you mess around with. And only every now and then does God bail people out. And this is what happened. A furious storm arises. Jesus stands up, and for the first time in the Gospel of Mark, he performs a miracle where he literally controls the forces of nature. And when they see it, they realize, wait a second. This guy teaches well. And he has some divine power where he performs some miracles from time to time. But he just did something that can only be explained in one way. And that's that he's got something going on that maybe he's God. Now, why are they terrified by that? They're terrified because Jews believe that if you are in the presence of God, you're going to die. It is not something you want. You don't want to be in the direct presence and power and authority of God, or else something bad will happen. And so they're looking at Jesus, and they're terrified by what he just did, and they're looking at each other, and their question is this: who is this? I think we're barely scratching the surface on this guy we've been following for 4 chapters. Now, this story is about to get incredibly interesting, because it turns out that Mark is not asking a rhetorical question. He doesn't just end the story with, who is this guy? Good luck finding out. Or go check out a book of theology at the library and find 10 easy proofs to figure out who this is. The way that he answers, who is this guy, is he just invites you to keep reading. And part of the answer to who is this guy is just the next story. And so we're going to read the next story. Before we do, I, too, once substituted for Chester Britt on Sunday morning. And I said, kind of as a joke, because we did Mark chapter 5, 1 through 20, I said, hey, if I never have any inspiration, I'm totally going to use you and crowdsource this sermon. So if you guys have good ideas, I'm just going to jack them all from you, take them for myself, and I'm going to preach it. That's this sermon. So thank you, Chester's class. All of you who were there that day, you helped me tremendously process and think this through. So Mark chapter 5, verse 1. Here we go. It's about to get intense. Are you guys ready? They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. I gotta imagine those disciples were thinking, sweet, a storm. Maybe he'll paddle us back to the Jewish side. Not for Jesus. Onward they go. They go across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. Mom and Dad have always told us never, ever, ever go there. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. Welcome to the Gerasenes, he said. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore his chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Let's let that sink in for a second. This is the first person to introduce himself to Jesus and the disciples. Now, if you are Jewish, there are a handful of things that you hold very dearly as the law of God that should never be compromised. Number one, you shouldn't, on a regular basis, be around dead bodies. Dead bodies render you unclean and unfit to worship God for a period of time. You have to go through a very intense kind of regimen of ceremonial washings and cleanings. Jesus literally takes them straight to a graveyard, friends. So now they're standing in an area of the tombs. A man runs to them, who we find out is naked, which is also a huge Jewish no-no. Renders you unclean, impure, unable to worship in the temple until you go through the ceremonial washings. This guy is somebody who is self-mutilating and harming himself. He's cutting himself with stones. A huge Jewish no-no. All of these things are kind of coming together in one story. And this is what this guy is all about. We're going to find out in a second. Many of you already know this. He is under the control of this very evil, dark influence in his life. In a second, Mark's going to stop calling them impure spirits, and he's just going to call them demons. And this is what the demons in him, I believe, are doing. They're chaining his heart and his mind to a graveyard, a constant 24/7 reminder of your ultimate fate is death, death, death. And in the meantime, agony and destruction and pain. That is your life forever. He doesn't need to be shackled by physical chains because he's shackled plenty as it is. And he runs to Jesus. And this is what it says in verse 6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. Can you guys picture this for a second and just laugh with me? Just picture stepping foot in enemy territory for the very first time, looking up a road, and literally a naked man running full speed towards you. What are you guys doing? Anybody else getting back into the boat? Jesus, you haven't walked on water yet, but you can walk back. We're out of here. Comes running. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, do not torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." So this guy comes running to Jesus, and he does something that I don't know that anyone else in the Gospel of Mark has done yet. He throws himself down on his hands and knees before Jesus, which is one of two things. This is either blatantly the posture of worship, or it's the posture of basically a beggar coming before a king and pleading for something. And this is what he says. I want you to catch this. "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" Do you remember the whole question that started this story? Who is this guy? And the disciples, if you went back to the last story, guess who what did the disciples call him? Do you remember? Teacher. Now a pagan, Gentile, naked, demon-possessed, we're going to find out in a second, it's worse because he's hanging around pigs too, which is really bad for Jews. He's literally like the embodiment of your worst Jewish nightmare. And we're laughing, but it's true. This would have been absolutely terrifying. He falls before Jesus, never met Jesus before, and he is one of the only people in any of the gospel messages that on first contact knows exactly who Jesus is. He knows Jesus' identity immediately. The disciples are still trying to figure it out. They're asking questions like, who is this guy? He keeps doing incredible things. Who is he? This guy runs right to him, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. There's something, even in the midst of his dark, demon-possessed spiritual battle going on, that recognizes the true divine identity of Jesus. It's an incredible story. If you want to take home Bible study, here it is. Read the entire Gospel of Mark. It's only 16 chapters. Won't take you that long. And just make note of everyone who actually knows who Jesus is. It's always people you would never expect, and they're the ones who shouldn't know who Jesus is. The disciples are trying to figure it out. The Pharisees deny it, but Roman centurions, sick little girls, broken women, and demon-possessed Gentiles know immediately. I guess it's sort of like what they say in rap culture, real recognize real, right? Nobody? Verse 9. Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. I was reading this week, and I was reminded of a professor I had in seminary when I was studying. And we were reading, I think, the Gospel of Matthew together. And he challenged us to do this thing. We were supposed to keep a journal as we wrote. And one of the things that I found the most fascinating was this. He said, every time Jesus speaks or does something, pause and write down your thoughts. What do you think his body language is? What do you think his tone of voice, his expression is? Is Jesus angry and kind of in a rush to get to the next thing for you? Is he like happy, like peace out surfer guy all the time? Like, what is he like? That's what we were getting at. It's those things that can't be encapsulated into writing. And I was reminded of that this week, and I thought, I've always read verse 9, "What is your name?" as like a quick hitter question, like, let's get to the point, let's get these demons out of this guy, right? And I thought, that doesn't add up with Jesus. I think what Jesus is saying is, to this man, "What is your name?" Before we talk about anything else, I want to just kind of know you. Just tell me about you. The twisted part of the story is the man is not even able to answer. The dark demon possession in him answers this way, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And they begged Jesus not to send them out of the area. I think the first readers and hearers of this story who are asking the same question as the disciples, who is this guy? I think they would have picked up on something that maybe we kind of brush over, and it's this name. This word legion. I think many of us would know. I think it's like a military term or something like that. The word legion is a Roman military term, and it describes a group of men, and depending on the legion, it can be anywhere from like 3,000 to 5,000, 6,000 people. In fact, this is a total nerd out moment. A lot of scholars think when Jesus feeds the 5,000, what he's doing is actually creating a different type of legion. He's creating a bunch of people who are dependent on God to go out and fight a different type of battle. Kind of cool. But legion, it's this highly trained, highly skilled, very violent force. And Caesar usually dispatches legions historically when things are not going well in certain areas of the empire. So if a whole city is like, forget Caesar, he's not really God, that's all propaganda, let's not pay our taxes, Caesar is probably going to dispatch the next available legion to go make sure they pay their taxes. And when I say make sure, I mean it's going to be pretty devastating for that city. And so this force, this is not a sermon about spiritual warfare or demons or trying to describe any of that. But I think if we want to do justice to what the Bible is teaching about evil and darkness, I think we have to pause and say this. At the very least, the powers of evil and darkness are a force that are organized, well-trained, and they have a plan. Listen to what they say to Jesus. Don't send us out of this area. Why would they not want to be sent out of the area? Because they're an organized, well-trained force that is supposed to be in that area. And what are they doing exactly? At the present moment, they're feasting on their host, and they're making him scream out night and day, break the shackles that presumably people put on him for his own good because he's violent towards himself and to others. He's a constant reminder to everyone around them that your ultimate fate is death and agony and pain and destruction. No matter how good life is going, you always have this guy in your midst to remind you how bad it will be for you. That's their mission and their plan. But then we get to the pigs. Verse 11. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. If you were Jewish and you had never heard this story before, you're like, this is literally the worst story I've ever heard. This is filthy and disgusting. And then you get to verse 11, you're like, what? Somebody made this up. There's no way all of these things exist in one place. Now there's pigs. By the way, I think this is awesome. The word pig in Greek is porkos. You should write that down. Yeah. It means nothing for this sermon, but it's awesome. So these Jewish disciples now are they're face first into the most uncomfortable, disgusting situation they could ever imagine. Then they finally, get vision beyond right in front of them. They look up and they're like, pigs? This is like the worst thing I could ever imagine. There's a huge herd of pigs feeding on a nearby hillside. And the demons beg Jesus, send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them. So he gave them permission. And the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake, and they were drowned. So that's the end of the non-kosher nightmare. Now, there's a couple things going on here, and I think it will help us kind of understand what's going to happen next. That's 100% my child. I should talk quieter, because when he hears my voice, he's just going to scream. I got to go back to that line. I have no clue what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this whole pig thing. Jews clearly believe that pigs are not kosher and there's nothing good about a pig. In fact, there's some fundamentalist Jews, even in Bible times, who thought like a living pig within a certain distance of you would be render you unclean. So this is a bad situation. But we're in Gentile territory, so we know that pigs are just going to fly there, right? It turns out that there's kind of two prevailing thoughts about what the heck 2,000 pigs are doing in the Gerasenes. The Gerasenes is kind of a rural, think farm/ranch area outside of this place called the Decapolis. It's 10 cities, but all these towns that are connected on the road, and you could kind of get to them all relatively quickly for the ancient world. And so there's a couple prevailing thoughts about what these pigs are doing here. And depending on what they're doing here actually helps us understand the story a great deal. The first prevailing theory is this. The Roman Empire they didn't want to get involved in actually farming, and so what they often did is they contracted people to provide food, especially for the military, which was enormous. It turns out that their favorite food for the military was pork, and the reason is that it's very well kept. When they would slaughter it, they'd process it, they would salt it, press it into barrels, and they could ship it thousands of miles, and it would still be good to eat by the time they got there. And so one theory is that the Roman government probably went in and bought this herd, which would make sense that it's exactly 2,000. It's a very precise number. If that's the case, these people just experienced Roman-bought pork running off of a cliff, and they're going to be in some major trouble. The second theory is this. In the Decapolis, archaeology has proven and shown to us that there are more pagan temples than you see churches like in Texas. I don't know, is that a good example? There are pagan temples everywhere. And guess what pagan temples sacrifice at a very high rate? Pork. If that's the case, and that's what all these pigs are doing here, they're the sacrifice for pagan temples. What Jesus has just done is eliminated the source of sacrifice for pagan worshipers. Either way, people are not going to be very happy about this, and we're going to see that they're not happy at all. The last thing that I read this week, I didn't come up with this, I just read it, and I thought this was amazing. These pigs crash headlong into the sea. The sea that Jesus just proved he has full authority and power over. These demons now reside and live in a place that Jesus has already proven, I'm in control here. There's nothing about this lake that I don't have the power over. I just thought that was awesome. Verse 14. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. I was trying to put myself in the shoes of these people who are tending pigs. And I just thought, what an awkward situation. Just imagine yourself fully removed on a hillside. All the pigs are down here. Now some weird people dressed like Jews just showed up on our shore. That's weird. Oh, dang, now they get to meet our friend, the naked tomb guy. That's strange. Oh, they're talking. It seems pretty civil. That's odd. Wait a second. All the pigs are running down the hill and they're dead. How do you explain that? Like when you get to town and you're trying to tell, you guys won't believe what happened. Actually, we don't really know what happened. All we know is we were sitting there watching some strange people. They might be Jewish. I don't know why they're here. And then our pigs are dead. It's an odd message to have to bring. Verse 15, when they came to Jesus, so all the people came because they couldn't believe it. They had to see it with their own eyes. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, but now he's dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave. They are terrified. And I think if we really get to the heart of what's going on here, and we're honest, I think most of us in some degree or another would be terrified too. Because I think in the story there's this scale. And on one side of the scale is that our local economy just ran off of a cliff. And the other side of the scale is one single man who has been tormented and possessed is now set free. It's clear to me that the local people are valuing those pigs quite a bit. They're going to have to answer to it. Whether it's the Roman government saying, "Where's our pigs?" or the pagan worship cult saying, "Where's our pigs?" or just hungry people saying, "Where's our pigs?" or people now not having a job, people are going to be upset about this. And my hunch is that when the numbers are extreme, if it was like 2 or 3 pigs, and we'd say 2 or 3 pigs and a man who is now set free of all of his evil spirits, we might say, oh, clearly healing the one man is priority. But when we start to talk about an entire town having to figure out what to do with the loss of this, we got to figure out where we're at on the scale. And it's clear to me that where Jesus is at on the scale is that the man wins. That the human life is the most important thing in this equation. And the story is set up where it's so extreme where you have to decide for yourself. And I think deep down, when extrapolated out to extreme circumstances, sometimes we might think, well, for one life, that's a lot of sacrifice for one life. Jesus says this, the life wins. The life is the most important. And they're terrified. They're terrified because these are the people who have been trying to hold this guy down to shackle him, who have tried everything. They've probably sacrificed some of those pigs in a pagan temple on his behalf, trying to figure out what is going on with this guy. He's tormented. He's tortured, right? They know full well. They might even know more than Jesus and the disciples how bad this is. They've tried everything, and then this random Jewish guy shows up, and now the guy is sitting clothed in his right mind. Whatever power that guy has should scare you. And so they plead, please leave. I love that they have to be kind about it, I feel like, right? If he has that much power, you don't want to be like, yo, let's do this, man. You got to get in your boat and leave or else we're going to shank you or something. It's like, do you not remember that I just totally calmed a whole storm and the pigs? I mean, I'm going to win this. So they're like, please, can you leave? The story ends this way. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus did not let him. He said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So this guy, freed of his bondage, finally, in full knowledge and full understanding, not just in his head, but in his heart, who Jesus is. And he does what I think anybody in that situation would do. I just want to be with you. I want to be with you. And Jesus tells him some bad news. I don't want you to come with us. You're not allowed. But I think what Jesus is saying is actually really profound and really awesome. The first thing he says, I want you to go home and tell your own people how much the Lord has done for you and how much mercy he's had upon you. This guy, for the first time, and we don't know how long, is now able to go back into his family unit, into his community. He's physically well. He's ready to regain relationships and friendships and be a son or maybe a father or a brother. Or what. He's now able to do all of those things. It's one of the pieces of miracle stories I think sometimes we miss, that people are healed, but then Jesus releases them back into life. And he tells them, go tell everybody, and this is my favorite part. The guy, I think, hears, go tell your own town, and what he kind of hears is like, well, town, city, county, I'm just going to tell anyone who will listen. So he actually goes to the Decapolis, 10 cities, and he tells everyone, and it says they're amazed. His story is so powerful, his experience is so powerful that people receive it and they're amazed by it. And for the very first time in Christian history, we have a missionary who knows who Jesus is in Gentile territory. It's not Paul, it's this guy. Jesus strategically leaves behind enemy lines somebody who knows exactly who Jesus is and has the story and the experience to back it up, and he tells it in a profound way that people are amazed by it. Is that awesome? I want to wrap up, and I want to wrap up with two things that I think are encouragements to you. The first one is something that I was wrestling with, and I thought, wow, how do you talk about that? It's that Jesus gets into a boat and he goes to the other side, and the only thing he's doing there is for this one guy. In fact, I was reading this week, and I found this quote, and I feel like it does way better than I could do. So if we have that quote, I'd love to put it up. It's just a doctor who teaches Bible at a seminary. He said this episode occupies the entire journey to the other side of the sea. Like, what he's saying is literally they don't do anything else. It leaves the impression on readers that curing Legion was the sole purpose for Jesus' decision to cross. The only reason he went in a boat. He dealt with a crazy storm that all the disciples think they're going to drown and die from, just so he can get there and encounter this guy and set him free. And it has me thinking these two questions that I think you should take with you. The first one is this. Do you actually believe that Jesus would cross a crazy lake in the middle of the night, deal with a wild storm that could potentially kill people, go to his enemies, encounter the most vile, terrible person you can imagine? That's the whole purpose of his journey, and he would do that for you. He would do that for you. It's the only purpose. He doesn't do anything else in the Gerasenes. He gets right back in the boat, and he goes home. Story over. So here's my question. Do you believe that Jesus would do that for you? Not just like, yeah, I feel like Jesus did that for me once, and then I totally blew it, and I'm really hoping he'll be back. He'll be back. He's back. He's already there. Jesus will cross a great distance and put up with all sorts of roadblocks and speed bumps to get to you. And you're not sitting waiting for him. He's already here. If you find yourself in a situation where you feel like nothing's going right, everything is wrong, Jesus has already done that for you. The second thing I've been thinking is, as God's people, as his representatives to the world that needs him, are we willing to do it? Are you willing to say, I would sacrifice, I don't think any of you have a herd of 2,000 pigs, but that was a great deal. Are you willing to sacrifice and go a great distance for the sake of one person that might actually identify as your enemy and believe and think things that you don't think and make you very uncomfortable with their behavior? Because Jesus would, and he's calling us to follow him. The last thing, and this is what I want to end with. I was literally like in the, what's the statement, in the 12th hour, or what's the hour where it's like last second? What is that phrase? The 11th hour, thank you. It's like the 11th hour. I was in my office this morning. It was like 8:45 a.m. And I noticed something I'd never noticed. I've read this story like 20 times. I never noticed this. And I didn't notice it because it's not actually in the text. It's something that's not in the text. The disciples say this many words. They don't speak, not one single time. not one word. They are purely witnesses to all of this happening. And I got to imagine in their individual minds, it's churning in there. Who is this guy? Who is this guy? He controls nature. He takes us on a very dangerous journey to save one person. We're trying to get our minds around it. And here's my encouragement. I pray that this week you would approach God and say, God, if there's gaps in my concept of you and my understanding of what you're all about, would you just blow the fence off that edge and let it grow? Would you stand with me this morning as we wrap up? We often do this here if you're new. If it makes you uncomfortable, it's totally fine. But we often close with our hands out, not because it's some creepy ritual, but just simply like a representation. God, if you have something for us, we're not holding on to anything, so give it to us. Let me pray over you. God, we want to know you. Like, we want to know you. We want to answer the question, who is this guy, with a giant, confident smile. And God, we recognize today that many of us know you and we're still learning about you, and those two things can go together. So God, would you reveal yourself more and more to us? When we come to uncomfortable things like you calling us to places and things that might make us uncomfortable, would you help us to make room in our God concept for that instead of build a wall or build a fence to keep that idea out? God, you've called us to a broken, hurting world, a world that doesn't know you, a world that desperately needs you, and you're calling us to be your representatives. So would we do it with grace and kindness? Would we do it with mercy and courage this week? As we go out, would you just be the shield about us? Would you remind us that you're present with us every step of the way? Thank you for this time. Amen. Amen. You are dismissed.
This is holy. This is holy.